On this place right here, a train wagon stood, and in that train wagon, an armistice was signed. The armistice that ended the First World War on November 11th, 1918. But how exactly did this armistice come into effect? What was in it? What led to the armistice? And how did it play out? It's what you will learn in this video about the armistice that ended the First World War. Good to have you back on the channel. If you're new, my name is Stefan. I'm a Dutch history teacher and I love to travel to historic locations. I'm right now near Compiègne, where the armistice of 1918 and the one of 1940 were signed. If you find this content interesting, consider subscribing and also hit that notification bell. What Germany during the First World War hoped to avoid happened: a two-front war. See, the original von Schlieffen plan was designed to quickly defeat France in order to then beat the Russians. However, the Russians mobilized quickly than the Germans had anticipated. And also, the war in the West got bogged down. Trenches appeared as a stalemate set in. Over the course of the 4 ensuing years, many bloody battles took place with countless of casualties that were lost in battles of attrition at Ypres, near Verdun, at the Somme and Passchendaele, just to name a few. On the Eastern Front, a different kind of war developed. See, Central and Eastern Europe was much bigger in territory, and therefore armies often maneuvered alongside each other. Also, most of the time, the Germans had the upper hand against the Russians. Due to the shortages that were caused by the war, a revolution occurred in Russia early 1917. The new government decided to continue the war against Germany, but that came to an end after Russia's second revolution in late 1917, also known as the October Revolution. After this, the Bolsheviks, who had come into power, decided to seek an armistice with the Central Powers, and that armistice was signed in March 1918, that was known as the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. See, the Bolsheviks had to deal with internal enemies. They had to defeat the Whites during the Russian Civil War and could simply not fight two wars at the same time. Therefore, they ceded large swaths of land to the Central Powers. Germany gained the breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine, and also they could transfer troops from the east to the west. However, because the territory was so big, they had to keep a large contingent of troops in the east to maintain order. Besides, the US had declared war on Germany the year before, and fresh US troops came in to fight alongside the British, French and Belgians against the Germans. Therefore, the Germans could no longer play the waiting game. German First Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff knew that a victory on the Western Front could raise morale, but a military disaster would lead to collapse of morale. It was an expensive gamble, but the Germans had no other choice. Also, because of the Allied naval blockade, there were severe food shortages in Germany. Therefore, they planned the spring offensives, which were launched on the 21st of March 1918 under the codename Operation Michael. German guns fired more than 1 million shells on enemy positions in the Somme-Arras sector. A total of 32 German divisions moved forward as they overrun the southern sector of the front. The Allies were in panic, and British military leaders spoke about an evacuation from mainland Europe. But it never got to that point. The German victory turned out to be a tactical victory at best, but definitely not a strategic one. The operations ended on the 5th of April. The Germans had lost many men, among which their precious elite troops, not to mention the supply lines that became dangerously overstretched. Ludendorff then ordered attacks on other fronts in Flanders and at the Aisne, but the troops were simply too exhausted. Often when they captured Allied positions, they stopped and tried to feed themselves before moving on. In short, the German spring offensive of 1918 caused more problems than it solved. And if you think things could not get any worse, well, then the Spanish flu hit the German troops. This worldwide influenza cost 50 million lives in total. In the summer, the Allies counterattacked. Soon the ground the Germans had taken during their previous offensive was lost to the Allies. The Allied 100 Days Offensive, with the Battle of Amiens, which was known as the Black Day of the German Army, where German commanders Ludendorff and Hindenburg realized the war was lost. And things did not look favorable for the Central Powers on other fronts. In September 1918, the Allies defeated the Bulgarians as the Macedonian Front. The Ottoman Empire signed an armistice in October 1918. The Italians took the initiative at the Second Battle of the Piave, which resulted in a costly blow for the Austro-Hungarians, which could not compensate for their losses. Soon the Italians attacked on other fronts, Montegrappa and at Vittorio Veneto, which got the Austro-Hungarians on the run. An armistice was signed on November 4th, 1918, and that made Germany the last Central Power standing. When Bulgaria left the war, German Kaiser Wilhelm II had a meeting with German generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff. Ludendorff argued that the war was lost, and left-wing politicians from Germany were to blame. Basically, here the infamous stab in the back myth was born. Also, a process of democratization was set in motion. This was done to subdue revolutionary sentiments, and also it might give a democratic Germany a better position at the negotiation table with American President Woodrow Wilson, who had presented his 14-point plan. Wilson wanted to negotiate with a Germany that was represented by the people, and not by despots, the Kaiser or Army High Command. Wilson saw through this, rejected the offer because he did not believe Germany was run by the people, but still by despots. By the end of October, Germany had transformed into a parliamentary democracy, with Bavarian Prince Maximilian von Baden as a Reichschancellor. Von Baden was supported by a large degree of the German political parties, also by Wilhelm II. Ludendorff was fired. Hindenburg could remain because it was feared that his resignation would lead to a moral collapse of the army. Hindenburg was sidetracked to make way for a new first quartermaster, Wilhelm Gruner. Yet a revolution still occurred in Germany. In Kiel, a mutiny broke out on November 3rd, led by socialists and communists. Soon uprisings in other German naval cities occurred, in Bremen, Lübeck, Hamburg and Tilsit. On the 7th, the revolutionaries spread inland. An armistice had to be negotiated. On the 7th of November, Berlin sent a telegram to French General Ferdinand Foch for a meeting. The next day, the German delegation, led by Matthias Erzberger, leader of the Catholic Center Party, managed to cross the front line in 5 cars and were escorted for 10 hours to a private train of Foch in the forest of Compiègne, 35 miles north of Paris. The Allied demands were handed over to Erzberger. It came down to complete surrender and demilitarization. They had 72 hours to reply, and there was to be no negotiation. This had to be communicated to Spa, because there the German Kaiser and Army High Command were located. But crossing into German-held territory was very difficult due to the heavy fire that was going on. General Detlev von Winterfeld, a German military representative, proposed to go with a French aircraft. Yet when the fire died down a little, mid-morning on the 9th of November, it was possible for the delegation to cross back into German-held territory. And so the unique experiment of an airborne flag of truce was never attempted. Shortly after 2 a.m. on Monday, the 11th of November, the parties assembled in the dining car of Foch's wagon. On this painting depicting the signature of the armistice, we see those involved. Behind the table, from right to left, French General Weygand, Marshal Foch, who was standing, the British Admiral Rosalind Wemyss, and the fourth from the left, British Naval Captain Jack Marriott. On the foreground, Matthias Erzberger, Major General Detlev von Winterfeld with the helmet, Alfred von Obendorf and Ernst von Zeelau. Erzberger was in no position to make conditional demands because the Allies were aware that he was instructed to accept the terms that were given. Erzberger pointed out that the starvation of his population would worsen if they had to hand over all road transport. Foch was willing to make some concessions, but the central element of the armistice, the surrender of territory, remained unaltered. Now, some demands could not even have been met by the Germans. For example, the aeroplanes. The Germans had to hand over 2,000 airplanes to the Allies, but they only possessed 1,700. The same goes for the German submarines, the U-boats. They had to hand over 170 of them, but they could not meet this demand, so therefore the demand was changed to hand over all submarines. The Germans were allowed to keep 5,000 of the 30,000 machine guns to quell unrest in Germany. The Royal Navy's blockade that deprived Germany of food was to be continued until the final treaty was agreed. Now, Erzberg and Oberndorf, they protested. They said this was unfair, to which Meuse replied, "Unfair? You sank our ships indiscriminately too." The Germans had sunk 11 million tons of Allied and neutral shipping during the war, but Meuse said he would refer the matter to London. The talking took almost 3 hours, and just after 5 a.m. the Germans said they were ready to sign. The terms would come into effect 6 hours later at 11 a.m. Paris time, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Fighting did not stop before that. Allied offensive action continued across most of the front line. Tragically, some men died shortly before the armistice came into effect. At 9:30 a.m., Private George Allan lost his life and was the last soldier from Britain to die before the armistice came into force. Some units got the order fairly late. There was one US captain that went by the name of Harry Truman that got the order at 10:30 a.m. The last soldier to die was most likely US soldier Private Henry Gunther. This 23-year-old American bank clerk from Baltimore faced anti-German sentiments because of his surname. Gunther faced anti-German sentiments because of his German background, and he was demoted to rifleman. And then right before the armistice came into effect, he wanted to redeem himself, and despite warning from both sides, he charged on the German machine guns and was fatally shot. It led to posthumous recognition, including the restoration of his rank and the awarding of the Distinguished Service Cross. Others say that it was Canadian soldier George Price who was the last soldier to die. He was shot through the chest by an enemy sniper at 10:57 a.m. on November 11, 1918, 3 minutes before the armistice came into effect. However, the guns fell silent. On November 11, 1918, chaos ensued in Central and Eastern Europe. As old empires crumbled, new states emerged, and there were wars, civil wars, and wars of independence. In Russia, a devastating civil war occurred between the Reds and the Whites. Nationalist factions from the bygone Russian and Austro-Hungarian empires strive for their own independent states. The Poles, they fought against the Germans, the Reds, and the Lithuanians. A war occurred between Romania and Hungary, and the Baltic states fought in wars of independence. I made an overview video of the chaos that occurred in the post-World War I years. See the link in the end cards any second now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like, subscribe if you have not already. I made a lot of videos about the Second World War and I put them all together in a playlist. You can find it right here. Thanks for watching and best wishes from Compiègne, France.